think the best way I can explain spirituality in my own words is to go back to the beginning, to what I think would be a good starting point, which would be the Atlantis myth. We know that Plato wrote the Timaeus in around 500 BC in Athens in ancient Greece during the classical period. And there are about 10 pages. And he was told the Atlantis myth by his ancestor Solon, who was one of the 7 wise men of archaic Greece in about 700 BC. And Solon heard the Atlantis myth while he was in the delta in northern Egypt by a priest. And we can imagine, because it's written by a Greek, and the gods in the actual document are actually Greek, then we have to work it out in terms of the Greeks were in 500 BC. They were in a sense questioning the nature of the gods, and they were moving more from a religious background to a scientific background. So Plato kept alive the more religious background, mythological background, and Aristotle was bringing in the more, you might say, materialistic or scientific point of view. So there are 2 different aspects of philosophy. But in around 332 BC, Alexander the Great conquered Egypt and built Alexandria, where the famous library was actually built. And within a short period of time, the Greek kings and pharaohs of Egypt were under Ptolemy. So the Ptolemaic Greek kings of Egypt, they lasted until about 30 BC, and the last one was actually Cleopatra. And in the Atlantis myth, we find that the sea god Poseidon, who's the Roman Neptune, he went to the islands of Atlantis, and evidently there was a kind of central island, and there were rings of islands around the central island. And at the centre of the island was a mountain. In the mountain lived an old man and his wife and daughter, and Poseidon mated with the daughter and produced 9 sets of twins. The oldest of one of the twins was Atlas, and he became the king of Atlantis. And the rest of the offspring, they were the priests of Atlantis, and they wore blue robes. I think the reason why they wore the blue robes, they were worshipping Zeus, the sky god. And blue is always associated with the sky. So Jesus' mother, Mary, the Queen of Heaven, she wears a blue robe. And so they're worshipping Zeus. And Poseidon, in the Greek mythology, Poseidon is the brother of Zeus. So they're worshipping Zeus, and they sacrifice to Zeus a bull. And he is known to manifest as a bull. So when he was pursuing the white cow, Europa, he mated with her, and from that the idea of Europe came into being. So she goes to Crete, which is just off the coast of northern Egypt, off the coast of the Delta. And anyway, Zeus was actually born in Arcadia, which is it was an actual place, but it was really, more importantly, it was a mythological place, and the main god of Arcadia was Hermes, the son of Zeus, and Hermes' son, the goat god Pan, which led to the idea of the goat being the devil and being related to the tarot card, the devil of the Aleister Crowley tarot pack. And that in turn comes from Set, who was actually a goat. So Set, the Egyptian Set, the evil Set, was a goat. Pan was a goat, and the modern concept of the occult devil is the goat, which is the Templars, Baphomet, etc. So they worship Zeus in the form of a bull, and they sacrificed the bull, which would be related to Taurus. So the constellation Taurus was in a sense sacrificed, and later in the Roman mythology, in Mithraism, Mithra, the sun god, slays the bull. And in the Egyptian model, the bull is, the Apis bull is actually killed, and that in the form of Osiris, and it's and there's a new bull born by Isis in the form of Horus. So you had the death of the bull and the rebirth of the bull from Osiris through Isis to Horus. And Horus originally, before the dynastic period, in very, very early times in Egypt, possibly prehistory, before 3100, when the dynastic period began, Horus was the main sky god. So again, we can associate Horus with the colour blue. His eyes were actually blue, which again signifies the sky. And his wife was, and his mother, so his wife was his actual mother, as it were, was Hathor. She was the earliest sky goddess, and her colour is turquoise. So turquoise is a greeny blue. So again, we have the idea of the sky being related to turquoise, blue, etc. So the Atlantean priests, there were 9 of them, and that's interesting because that relates to the 9 gods of the Ennead of Heliopolis, which were under Osiris from Orion, and his brother was Set, his wife was Isis, and his mother and father Nut and Geb, sky and earth. They were also members of the Ennead, and originally the chief of the Ennead was Atum of Heliopolis. He was called the Hidden One, and because the Ennead, as I see it, were invisible. They weren't actually part of the visible universe. They weren't as they didn't, you might say, they weren't really earthbound. They weren't particularly earthbound. And they would be in the invisible part of the universe, so they would be hidden from the visible light, the visible star systems and solar systems. So you've got the 9 priests, you've got Atlas, and Atlas originally was one of the Titans, and the Titans were the offspring of Rhea and Saturn. And Atlas was seen as a pillar that held up the sky, and he also carried the sky, but he also upheld the earth. Of course, the earth, in a sense, is in the sky, and he held up the earth as a pillar. And in ancient Egypt, the same figure would be Shu, and Shu was the firstborn. So he was the very firstborn of the gods, and he's a member of the Ennead. And his wife would be Tefnut, which is really marked. So you have Shu, who represents air, light, space, and also the sun. So you could see the firstborn as the sun coming out of the dark matter, the dark energy where the Ennead are, and he would appear as the sun. So what we're seeing is the appearance of a star. So you could say, in one sense, the first star that emanated from the Ennead, the invisible Ennead, was a sun, and the golden ray of the sun became a pillar, so a pillar of light. So if you think of the cosmos as a watery abyss, and the star comes up on the horizon of the watery abyss, then it would cast a golden ray of light, and that could be seen as a pillar connecting, you might say, the stars to the earth, for example. And Tefnut, which is marked, would be what we would call cosmic order, and also world order. So she'd be the cosmic order and the world order, and she is the mate or consort of Thoth. Thoth is the architect of the universe, and he was considered the highest principle in the whole of the pantheon of the gods in Egypt. He's the one. Just simply, he's not a god. He's not considered to be a god. The highest god in the Ennead is Osiris, and they're still in the universe, or in the invisible part of the universe. But the architect of the universe is the one, and that's Thoth. He's the god of wisdom in terms of the above, and he's the god of knowledge as below, so as above, as below. So what is wisdom in the heavens is knowledge on earth. And if we look at the sacrifice of the bull on Atlantis, which is in the center of the temple where the pillar was, so there was a red pillar which would represent Atlas. The bull is sacrificed under the red pillar, and they sprinkled the blood of the bull over the pillar, so it's a red pillar. And you could say that above the pillar you could imagine Zeus, the sky god. Now, it says in the Timaeus, in the Atlantis myth, that Athena, who's the goddess of war and the goddess of wisdom, so the wisdom is the owl, and she founds Athens. So she founds Athens in 9000 BC, which would be 11,500 years ago, and then she founds Sais in the Delta, where the Atlantis myth was first heard by Solon, Plato's ancestor. She founded that in 8000 BC, or no, it wasn't so much 8000 BC, it was 8,000 years before she founded Athens in 500 BC, for example. So it'd be about 10,500, and and she founded Athens. That would be approximately 11,500. Now, she was given what's called the seeds of the race. She was given the seeds of the race by Gaia, the Earth Mother, and by Hephaestus, the god of fire, which is Vulcan, the god of the volcano. Now, in my own study, I found that the volcano symbolizes the first pyramid that was built by Imhotep in 2650 BC. That was a step pyramid, and it's truncated. Now, volcanoes are truncated, and the Atlantis myth was heard in the Delta, and the Greek letter for the Delta is a triangle. And so you could say the myth of Atlantis was heard inside a volcano, inside a pyramid, which is the shape of the delta. And so I would assume the reference of Atlantis myth told within a volcano, a triangle, the reason the Egyptians or Plato placed the myth in Sais within the volcano, and Sais was dedicated to the goddess of war Neith, and Neith was the Greek Athena. So we have Athena in Sais. And so I think the Egyptians inherited the mythology of Atlantis, and showing that Atlantis was actually a volcanic island. And it actually says it in the myth of Atlantis that Athena drove back the Atlanteans from the Mediterranean Sea. They came from the Atlantic Ocean through the Pillars of Hercules right into the Eastern Mediterranean. She drove them back, and there was a great earthquake, and the islands of Atlantis sunk. So that's what happens with volcanic islands. They emerge out of the water when they're active, and they submerge when there's earthquakes and things like that. So I think that it shows that Atlantis was a pyramid culture, as it were, based on the volcanic islands. So Hephaestus, who's the god of the volcano, gives, and Gaia, which is earth and fire, the earth mother and the fire god, earth and fire. So they give Athena the seeds of the race to found Athens and Sais. The seeds of the race, I believe, are really the dragon seeds. And in ancient Egypt, the step pyramid was aligned to Draco, the dragon, and that's the seat of the eternal king Osiris. So the dragon seeds are really coming from the Isle of Fire, which is again a volcano, you might say a volcanic or pyramidal shape on from Draco, the dragon. So the seeds of the dragon are brought to the pyramid by the phoenix. The phoenix is the bird who dies into the ash of the fire and is reborn from the fire. So she's seated above the Isle of Fire, the triangular pyramid. The reason is that the constellations in the heavens, they're known as island constellations, and the word for star is Saba. But they're island constellations in the great ocean. So you imagine the universe as an ocean, and they're the islands that appear and disappear like volcanoes. They appear and disappear. So you could say that the concept is that Draco was a volcano. Now it's interesting because Hephaestus is the son of Zeus and Hera, and they live on Mount Olympus. And Hephaestus was born he was born looking very ugly, quite ugly, and through whatever means they cast him out of Mount Olympus. He fell onto the island of Lemnos in the Aegean Sea, and he damaged his leg and he became lame, and he took residence in the base of the volcano on Lemnos, the volcanic island, and he made in his furnace he made the weapons of the heroes, and he made ornaments for the gods. In fact, it's said that he actually made the human figure. It says that he actually made the human figure. Now, his assistant in the volcanic island was Typhon, and Typhon is the dragon, and he symbolises fire. In the Egyptian model, Typhon is Set. Now, Set is related to the black sun, and the funerary god Pa-Seka Osiris represents the black sun. Now, Pa, the earliest god, in fact, he was the god of the capital, Memphis, so he's one of the earliest gods, and he wears a black skull cap, which would represent the black sun, because the black sun really becomes the black head of Osiris when he's in the mummy chamber. He's got the black head of the black sun, because the sun sets from a golden into a red into a black sun. So the skull cap, the black skull cap, represents the black sun, and Osiris is known as the Black One, and the black sun is also Saturn, Satan, and Set, the sun Set. So Pa, with the black skull cap, is actually the god of the pyramid. So when the Greeks took over Egypt, they said that Pa, the god of the pyramid, was Hephaestus, the god of the volcanic island. So they're the same. So Imhotep built his pyramid that was truncated. So we have the Atlantis myth told inside the volcano, told inside the Isle of Fire, told inside the pyramid, and the triangular shape is the element fire anyway. So she was given the seeds of the race, and I'm saying that because it was given by Gaia and Hephaestus, the earth and fire, So you could say, again, the earth is the volcano and the fire is the fire within the volcano, and you have Typhon, the dragon, and you have Osiris, who's the black sun. His brother is Set, who kills Osiris, and he becomes identified with the black sun. In fact, he becomes identified with Saturn and with the black magic. Now, actually, the black magic, the idea of black magic, comes from the idea that the Greek Egyptus, which is Egypt, was originally known as Kem, Q-E-M. So the Egypt was known as Kem, which were the black lands. The black lands get their name from the black silt that comes down the Nile when it floods during the inundation. The inundation is actually signalled by the rising of Sirius, which is Isis, and Orion, which is Osiris. And it takes place in July at the heliacal rising. So when the sun rises, Helios, heliacal, when the sun rises, that's their sun being reborn. Horus is reborn. So the black silk comes down the valley. It covers a narrow strip of land on either side of the valley, and it goes into the delta. And so I think that Kem, the black lands, is referring to the fertile soil of the Nile River, and that becomes the black art of alchemy. So the black art of alchemy, that signifies it. First of all, it's black, the soil is black, and when it becomes, because it's fertile, when it starts to regenerate, it becomes green. Now Osiris's skin is green, and he's the vegetation god. So when you see him inside the acacia ark, he's put inside this ark, you see the corn growing out. He's the corn god, and you see it growing out of the ark. So you see these green stalks growing out of the ark, and then you see the golden corn. So you have the black, the green, and the gold. Now, in order to, when you regenerate, when you can imagine from the seed going into the black soil, when it starts to regenerate, you could say it starts to fire. So you're getting the red element. So you've got the black, the red, the green, and the gold. So that would be, I think, the alchemical colours, the alchemical death, transformation and rebirth, or death, transmutation and rebirth. So the black sun, the black head of the dead king Osiris, you could say that becomes the black cube. So Osiris is in the mummy chamber, that's below the pyramid, it's in the earth, and that's his father Geb, the earth god Geb, and that becomes the black cube. So the black cube is really the tomb of the black one, Osiris, and that's related to the black art of alchemy. Now, when you're being initiated, you become a follower of Thoth, the god of self-knowledge, and you also become identified as a follower of Horus, because he's the sun hero, he's the initiate that overcomes Set, the dragon. So the initiate enters the underworld during the dark night of the soul, which is the black cube, which is also related to Set, to Osiris, and to Saturn. Saturn is the black star, or the black cube, or the black sun. And when you enter the underworld, you have to you come in contact with Thoth and Isis. They're the moon deities. Now, so that means the black cube is lit up by the white light, and the initiate puts on the white robe, the purified white robe of the initiate, under the influence of the moon, the light of the moon. And really, they're the magician and the sorceress. Thoth and Isis are the magician and the sorceress. And they teach the words of power to the initiate. The words of power are really related to the magical formulae of the gods. So you say all the gods have, you might say, secret names. They have magic names. And when you read the Book of the Dead, you're taken through all the chapters or the spells of Isis. They're the chapters or the spells of Isis. There's well over 100. And they're each like magical formulae. So in effect, you have to master the meaning. So it's like a great poem. You have to interpret the poem in a sense through your own life. You can't just sit down and read the Book of the Dead as a kind of dead text. It's got to come alive inside you, in your visions and your dreams and your synchronicities. The magic has to come alive in your life. It has to be revealed to you in your life, inside your psyche or in the world around you. So you have revelations, synchronicities, epiphanies in your life. And then if, for example, when I was in Oxford, I knew very little about occultism, Egyptian magic. This was in 1988. I knew very little. And one day I had this visualization. I was just sitting, I had this visualization, and my eyes were closed, but inside my eyes looked up to the crown of my head, and I saw this black beetle coming out of like a cocoon, a white cocoon. And then I had in front of my eyes, while they were closed, I had this jet black jagged hole. It was like a jagged hole, just like a broken, as if you broke a window, this jagged hole, and it was jet black. And I felt like my mind was going to be drawn inside that black space. It was very, very terrifying for a moment. And then this black beetle came across the jagged hole, and it's like protecting me from going into the jagged hole. And I found out that it was the scarab beetle. The scarab beetle is the Scarabaeus, and that represents Khepera, the creator god. So the scarab-headed god Khepera is the creator god. So we decided, my friend and I, to go to the Ashmolean Museum, which was set up by the Rosicrucian alchemist Elias Ashmole, and he was one of the founders of the Royal Society in London, and they were basically Freemasons, Rosicrucians. And we went to the Egyptian room, which was where I used to go as a child. Actually, I used to like going to the Ashmolean as a child, growing up in Oxford. And we went to the Ashmolean, and we looked in the Egyptian room. My friend noticed this sarcophagus, very beautifully painted sarcophagus, of an Egyptian songstress, and on the lid at the top, where her head would have been, was a blue lotus with a scarab in the centre. So it fit very nicely with the idea of seeing the scarab at the crown of the head. And of course it's the creator god, so it would represent rebirths. So that would be in the Kundalini, the Tantric yoga, Kundalini of Tibetan Buddhism, the yogi's self or soul or spirit exits the body through the crown. So again, that fits in the idea of rebirth through the crown of the head. And so that kind of vindicated the idea of the scarab. So I'm saying that was revealed to me, and then what happened is I started to study various texts, find out more and more about the scarab, and in the Egyptian model, the scarab beetle, in reality, it bears its seed or the germ, its seed inside a ball of dung. So it rolls this ball of dung and puts its seed inside, and that's identified with the black sun. So when the sun sets in the west, that becomes the black sun, and then the scarabaeus, which represents death, transformation and rebirth, rolls the ball of dung, the black ball of dung as it were, to the middle, you might say, under the apex of the pyramid. So you have the apex of the pyramid, and if you draw a line from the apex right down through the centre of the pyramid, right into the earth, the centre of the cube as it were, and right down to the very bottom, where the mummy chamber is and the black sun. So you could say the black sun is at the bottom, the very bottom, in the south, the mummy chamber, and there you find the lake of fire, which is another term for the Isle of Fire. You could say the lake of fire becomes the Isle of Fire, and the soul, the initiate, has to enter the Isle of Fire to be baptized in fire and water, and then that means the fire becomes the colour red, the colour of the red, and so Horus becomes red cloak. So you put on the scarlet robe, and you could say the black cube becomes the red altar. So the black tomb becomes the red altar of sacrifice. And if you take that further, if you roll the ball, the red ball, towards the east, where it's going to be reborn as the golden sun, Horus is going to be reborn as the golden sun, then his grandfather Geb gives him a golden throne to rule over the earth. He becomes master of the earth. So you could see that as a golden cube. So you have the gold, you have the black cubic tomb, you have the red cubic altar, and you have the golden cubic throne, the three levels of alchemy. So you have death, transformation and rebirth. Now, they were given Hephaestus, fire, volcano, dragon, Typhon, and Gaia, earth. They gave Athena the seeds of the race to found Athens. And their offspring themselves, Gaia and Hephaestus, their offspring is Erechtheus, and he becomes the first king. So the seeds of the race really become the first king, and the first king was a serpent king. So Erechtheus was a serpent king. Now, Athena competed with Poseidon, and remember Poseidon was the one in a sense, who began the Atlantis myth. He actually mated with one of the women of Atlantis. They were the kind of aboriginal, the original. They lived in a mountain. So she competed with Poseidon for the founding of Athens, and she won. She actually won because she planted an olive tree, and it grew on the what's called the Acropolis, and on top of the Acropolis is the Parthenon. And in a temple dedicated to Poseidon and Athena and Hephaestus is the temple of Erechtheus, and it's really it was a snake pit. So it was actually a snake pit. Now, what makes it even more interesting, if the Serpent King was the king of Athens, which was like where Plato lived and the Atlantis myth and everything, then the county or the province in which Athens was the capital was Attica. Now, the god of Attica was Cecrops, and Cecrops or Kekrops was actually a serpent. So you could see him as a serpent dragon. And it's said that he came from Sais, and that's where the Atlantis myth was told. So this aboriginal serpent king came from Sais, where the Egyptian the Atlantis myth came from. So again, we have the dragon king associated with Atlantis, etc., and Osiris in Draco, and the step pyramid was aligned to Draco, and so the seeds of the race given to Athena, and that's more or less, I think, what goes on in the Atlantis myth anyway. So I think it definitely shows that when the Atlanteans came into the Mediterranean and they came right up to the borders of Egypt, and then they were driven back by Athena, and she establishes Athens and she establishes Sais. This is all mythological. Then I think it shows that the Egyptians inherited the Atlantean mythology, the Atlantean religion, the Atlantean magic, and that's why they had the Atlantis myth told inside a volcano, which is a pyramid, and in the delta. So Imhotep was considered by Wallace Budge, who was the Egyptologist in the British Museum in the early part of the 20th century. He wrote the definitive books on Egyptian mythology, Egyptian theology, even Egyptian magic. He was the head keeper of the Egyptian collection, and he said that Imhotep would be considered the genius of his age. He was like the key figure, and during his time it was a renaissance of the culture. And the same was said of Akhenaten when he set up Amarna, the city of Amarna. He was considered a genius as well. So you've got Imhotep, who was considered the genius. Now, I consider Imhotep the equivalent of Jesus and Buddha, because he was seen as the wise man of the whole of the Egyptian period from 2650 right through to Alexandria, which is right up to just before Christ was born. So he was like the Buddha or the Christ of his age. and he was deified as Thoth, the One. So he was deified as Thoth, the One, and Thoth was known as thrice great Thoth. Thrice great Thoth is Hermes Trismegistus, the founder of alchemy, and we said that Egypt was Chem, the black art of alchemy. So we have the black art related to Set and Saturn. So in the modern period you have Crowley and his tarot card, and he puts the goat, the devil, on his tarot pack, and that would be Set and Saturn and the black sun, etc., etc. And that would be also Osiris. So Crowley identified himself with the B666, which is the number of man. So in order for Jesus to become Christ, as Siddhartha Gautama became Buddha, you have to overcome the B666. So Crowley identified himself with the B666, and you have to overcome that. So in a sense, you could say that Crowley was a self-acclaimed sacrificial hero. So in a sense, the kind of wickedest man in the world, as told by the London press in the early part of the 20th century, the wickedest man in the world, the B666. So he becomes a sacrifice. So in a sense, he then said, the age of Aquarius, as it were, the new age, as it were, that's the age of Horus. So you could say that the black sun, which is Set, the Crowley devil, and Osiris, the black one, identified also with Draco the dragon, and Set was also the serpent. So you could say that Crowley, in a sense, you have to overcome Crowley. So in a sense, Crowley represented modern occultism, and you have to overcome occultism. But when you're an initiate in the Book of the Dead, you have to overcome the gods. You have to master the occult formulae, the magical formulae. You have to learn the secret names of the god. And when you learn the secret names of the god, then you're empowered by the names of the gods, which I call the meta-program. So your psyche is meta-programmed by the gods, so that you can dream in symbols, you can have synchronicities in symbols, like the scarab is a symbol, and these symbols are revealed to you, just like in music and in poetry and literature and all that. You can have the deep inner meaning, the inspiration, the inside culture and music. You can have an inner meaning revealed to you, and as you begin to understand and master that kind of self-knowledge, then in a sense you become as God. So Jesus becomes identified with Christ, Siddhartha Gautama became Buddha, and Imhotep became Thoth, i.e. thrice great Hermes. And Imhotep was celebrated in Alexandria, and you might say that he became Hermes Trismegistus, and Hermes Trismegistus in alchemy becomes Mercurius, which is related to the planet Mercury. Now in the step pyramid there are 6 steps. So you have a truncated pyramid like a volcano, and you have 6 steps all around. You have these 6 steps. The first step is Earth, and then the next 5 steps are the planets. In ancient Egypt there were only 5 planets that were known. So you have the Earth, Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Venus and Mercury, which again is Hermes. Mercury is actually Hermes. And so you could say the 6 steps are the 6 faces of the cube. So a cube has 6 faces, and the cube is under the pyramid. It has 6 faces. The cube also has 8 corners, and then above the cube you have a 4-sided pyramid which has 5 corners. So you have 8 corners in the cube, above it you have 5 corners. That's 13. And then you could say the whole pyramid, which is above and below, as above so below, because the above, the pyramid, the actual triangle is representing the sky. That represents the sky goddess Nut, and her mate is the earth god Geb, and their son is Osiris. Osiris's sacred number is 14, so you have 5 above, 8 below, that's 13, and then you make them all one, and it's 14. Now Imhotep said that the step pyramid was the house of Osiris. So you could say the step pyramid is actually the figure of Osiris. He's in his house. It's also known as the castle of eternity, and it's also known as the underworld. And the mythology is that Thoth is the ferryman, and Thoth, you might say, is the ferryman of the gods. And the gods in their starships, they come from their island constellations down the Milky Way, which is the celestial river Nile, as above so below. So you have the terrestrial river Nile and the celestial river Nile, and he ferries the various gods from Orion, from the zodiac, down the Milky Way, and they all come via Draco the dragon, because that was the pole star. So the ancient Phoenicians were they were the ancient mariners, and they went all around to India, they went along the Mediterranean out to the Atlantis, and they actually came to England, to Cornwall, and they traded tin in Cornwall. And of course Cornwall is the seat of King Arthur. So Thoth would ferry the various gods in their starships or their sunboats, because a star is the sun, so it'd be in their sunboats. So he'd ferry Osiris in Orion, or Sirius, Isis in Sirius. They come down the Milky Way, they go via the pole star in Draco, the dragon, and of course the step pyramid is aligned to Draco. So you come from Draco to the sun, down through the planets, and then you come to the top of the step pyramid. So the sunboat comes down to the top of the step pyramid, and it lands on the truncated platform. So he's made this platform, as it were, and the sun is the 7th. So you have the 6 planetary steps, and then you have the sunboat making the 7th. So when the initiate, Osiris, ascends in the east, the initiate Horus ascends in the east, and he's known as Ra Horakti. So he's the east-facing Sphinx. So you see at Giza, the east-facing Sphinx, which is facing towards Heliopolis, the city of the sun, which is the city of Ra, which is the city of Horus. So Horus ascends the step pyramid, and he steps aboard the sunboat. So the sunboat is the 7th, and then he's transported as a star, as a sun, he's transported to the 7th heaven. And then when he goes out of the solar system via Draco along the Milky Way, he goes to Sirius. That's the planet. That's the star system of his mother. And Osiris is in Orion. So you have the hunter, Orion the hunter, and if you follow the belt, the Orion's belt, the 3 stars of the belt, if you follow it down, you come to Sirius, and that's the dog star. So that's the dog of the hunter. And the star system, the zodiac or the star system, which rotates around Draco. So you've got the zodiac are the kind of, you might say, the belt of animals. They're the belt of animals. And, you associate many of the gods with animals. Now, the star system, you might say, the fixed stars, that's the 8th. That's the 8th level. And beyond the fixed stars, the 8th, is the Ennead, the 9th. And they're invisible. Now, it's interesting that in the tarot deck, the Magus number 1, the first card, he has on his head, he has a headdress or a cap, and that's the lemmasé. And the lemmasé is a figure 8 on its side, a figure 8 on its side. That's the sign for infinity, and that represents the fixed stars. So you could say the Magus is the initiate, the master, who's mastered the gods. He's mastered the names of the gods. He's mastered the magical formulae. So in a sense, he's Hermes Trismegistus and he's Thoth. He has the lemmasé, the 8 on his head. And another correspondence to that is that the headdress of Thoth, is a crescent moon, the sickle moon, the crescent moon, holding the full moon. And that again is a form of the lemmasé. So you have the sickle moon, which is like the waning moon in the west and the waxing moon in the east, which forms a kind of 8. You could say it forms an 8 with the full moon in the centre. And so the Magus card, well, he's standing before a table. Now the table is you could say is a square, and that square is a cube. So in the ancient world, the earth was always seen as a square, the 4 corners of the earth, the 4 cardinal points. So that's the earth, and on the table are the four elements, or the 4 objects, or you could call them power objects. So that's like the Tibetan mandala. So you have the mandala, the square, and you have a circle in the centre, and that's the castle, usually seen as a castle. So when Imhotep built the step pyramid, he had a white wall around the step pyramid, and the step pyramid is the castle of eternity. And of course, in the Grail legend, you have the Grail castle. Now who lives in the Grail castle is the Fisher King. Well, Osiris is the fish god. So you have the fish god Osiris, and you have the Fisher King, and Parsifal, who's the descendant of the Fisher King. Fisher King's the ancestor in the castle, and Parsifal goes to visit him. And of course Parsifal's Horus, because Horus goes to visit his father in the underworld. And the Grail kingdom is the land of the dead, and the underworld is the land of the dead. So Osiris is also the god of the Nile. So he's the fish god of the Nile River. Just as he's in Draco, the dragon, which is in the Milky Way, or is in Orion in the Milky Way. So Osiris really was considered to be possibly a prehistoric king. He might have been a prehistoric king, he might have been a real person. Anyway, when he came into being during the period of Imhotep, he became the God-man. He was like the first God-man, so he was like, you might say, the first incarnation of a god. And so you have Parsifal going into the Grail castle, and he has a vision of the Grail. So he sees this vessel of gold. He sees this shining light as a vessel of gold. Now, he sits at the table and has a feast. So on the table is the pomegranates, which are to do with death and transformation and rebirth. The pomegranate is really the forbidden fruit of the Garden of Eden, which is related to the serpent. Now, he's at the table, they're having a feast, and the Grail bearer, the lady, the Grail bearer, comes in with a vessel of gold and puts it in the middle of the table. Now that table is the emerald table. So the green emerald table, he puts the vessel of gold. While Hermes Trismegistus wrote the 13 principles of the Hermetic art on the emerald table. And we said that the pyramid, the upper and lower aspect of the pyramid and the tomb or the cube, that constitutes 13, and Osiris is 14. So the emerald table, the 13 principles, they would be the principles of Thoth, Hermes Trismegistus, thrice great Hermes, and that's what you have to learn. You have to master that in the underworld. That's the whole point of being an initiate. You have to master the 13 principles. Then you become identified with Osiris, and you ascend in the east to the sunbow, and you become a star. Now, the white wall around the step pyramid is really, this signifies the underworld, and the sigil of the underworld is a circle with a star inside, because you're born as a star. So the underworld is surrounded by a black wall beneath the ground, the black cube, a black wall, where the sun goes around as a black sun, and then above it's the white wall. And so Horus is born, you might say, from, he's born as the sun god, so he's representing the circle, he represents the vessel of gold, and the vessel of gold is the Grail. So the Grail is the vessel of gold. And the pyramid is Mer, M-E-R, Mer. M is the place, and R is to ascend. So the pyramid is the place of ascension. That's what it actually means, the place of ascension. And so you ascend as a star, because the sigil of the underworld is a star within a circle. So Parsifal has a vision of the Grail. Now Carl Jung, he wrote a book called Flying Saucers in 1959, 2 years before his death. And he said that probably from what he knows, he said it's probable that UFOs are interplanetary, but he said mainly the UFO is a symbol of the psyche. It's a projection of the psyche. So from an archetypal level, you might say an archetypal code, the symbolic code of let's say the Ennead is the archetypal code, the Ennead, and they're hidden, because Atom, the head of the Ennead in Heliopolis, he's the hidden one. So they're hidden. So then you've got the fixed stars and the zodiac and all of that. So then you manifest, you might say, the gods in symbolic form. So what he said was the UFO is a symbol of the Godhead. The UFO is a symbol of the Grail. The Grail is the vessel of gold. The vessel of gold is the sun is Ra, and you incarnate as Ra. The pharaoh is an incarnation of Ra. And so that would be an archetypal projection that comes into the psyche, and it might appear in the world around you, not necessarily in solid form. So it'd be interdimensional, psychophysical. So it appear in your psyche in a dream, and it can appear, as I've had it here in Colchester by the castle. I had 5 UFOs appear, and twice I saw 5 UFOs right next to the castle. And of course Parsable has a vision of the UFO, the Grail, which is the vessel of gold, which is the sun, as it were. He had that in the Grail kingdom, in the Grail castle, and Horus becomes a star, which means he goes aboard the sun boat, and that's above the castle of eternity. So it's all related. And in ancient times, in Celtic times, the Greeks saw Britain as Hyperborea. Borea is from Boreas, the north wind. So it says in actually a mythic account that Hyperborea is beyond ocean at the back of the north wind. Now that means that in Egyptian terms, the north wind comes from the North Star, which is Draco the dragon. The north wind comes from the North Star. And Oceanus in Greece is the ocean, the celestial ocean that surrounds the earth. So Hyperborea is the land of light, and that is Britain. And the god of Britain, the sun god and the sea god of Britain, is Beli. And Beli is a dragon. And he founds the Pendragon line of kings, and one of those is Uther Pendragon. He's the father of King Arthur. So King Arthur really actually comes from the line of dragon kings. And we saw the serpent king of Athens, and Cecrops that came from Sais was a serpent king, an aboriginal serpent king. We have the aboriginals in Australia, they worship the sky serpent. We have the Buddha, when he was enlightened, the Nagas came to visit him, and they're the initiates of wisdom, and they were the original aboriginal serpent kings of India. So you could say the serpent in the Garden of Eden says to Eve, "You will not die but be as gods, knowing good and evil. The tree is to be desired to make you wise." So the serpent is a kind of dragon path, which is the Tao, is the dragon path, the ley line that connects the initiate to the goal, which is the Tao. So you travel the dragon, the ley line, the dragon path. In Aboriginal Australia, you travel the lines of song from spirit centre to spirit centre. So that means to say, wherever you travel in the world, whatever you do in the world, along the dragon path, the secret doctrine of your life story, the fate and destiny of your life story, is revealed to you in symbolic form. So I had the scarab in Oxford, and I've had the red cube in Lancaster, in Lancashire, and here, when I came here, I've had the UFO near the castle, which relates to the Dragon Castle, which relates to the Step Pyramid in the Grail Kingdom, and all of that. So I guess here now I will terminate this particular talk and hope that it made at least some sense to you. Okay, bye.